The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Lighting Controls podcast. We have another fantastic episode for you today with a guest who's been on the show previously. But before we jump into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and also Light Fair. After the brief hiatus, we are excited to see you all there in the spring.
And it's financially supported by National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We have all of our episodes, merch store, news feed, etc., etc. Additionally, information about the Lighting Specialist in Control certification by NAILD, which we are happy to see emerging. If you want to take your lighting controls knowledge to the next level, definitely worth checking it out. We're doing pre-registration right now, and we'll be announcing registration coming in 2025. So check out information on that. But until then, let's get into the conversation. We have a returning guest here, Avi. Avi, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do for people who didn't see the episode that you were on the last time?
Yeah, absolutely. So officially Avraham, but I let everybody call me Avi, Benjamin kind of a thing. So Avi Moore, I am the founding partner, principal, and CEO, IT manager, HR manager of More Lights. We are based in Chicago. We illuminate experiences. We create spaces that people want to tell stories in. And I like to remind people you can't see in spaces that don't have windows without light. And then there's that big shiny thing that I've been going around calling Liminaire Number One, that we have to control sometimes in those daylit spaces. And you need a lighting designer to control said light, and lighting controls to control said Liminaire Number One and the electric sources we use in these spaces. So we work in spaces from airports to a single Monet at the Art Institute and everything in between. We're a staff of 5, and we specify lighting controls. We do not call manufacturers and ask them design control systems for us. We actually, this is actually just came up recently, that most of the rep agencies have 2 different people that call on us, the controls person and the fixtures person. And it's a little unusual, but that's what we need because we actually specify lighting controls.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think that that's a really important distinction because we have so many lighting designers, engineers, etc., who don't really do the documentation in-house. They rely on the resources of reps or other groups that are part of sales to kind of create that documentation for the purpose of either a design bid project or a design build project. So ultimately,
and any of those lighting designers who want an independent person to design a lighting control system for us can absolutely pick up the phone and dial More Lights, and we'll be happy to do that for them.
Totally. Well, and by all means, I definitely want to help market groups like More Lights because of the fact that it is a necessary component to independent lighting controls design. When you work with a sales rep, you are kind of in their ecosystem of lighting controls design.
And I think that there is a conversation to be had about a core responsibility of a independent lighting designer should be designing the controls. It is not an alternate. It is not an ad service. It is not something that can be passed on to somebody else. If I pick what that thing is, then I got to figure out how to turn it on and off and meet energy efficiency requirements. Right. And let's not forget about Liminaire Number One, that super bright, shiny thing that's going to come through the windows. I know it's hard shades don't go in the section 16 specification. But guess what? The wiring to them is, and if it's automated, which my opinion is most of them should be, would be in that section as well. The fabric, okay, well then let's actually coordinate with the architects and interior designers and pick fabrics.
Well, and
quite honestly,
so
that's
a really good distinction there as well. How do you coordinate that? Because it's a really important thing to think about when you're writing book specs and you need to point to other sections or even other divisions and say, hey, by the way, there's more to this system than just X. You need to read this additional spec that's out there. How do you make sure that happens?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, if we're talking about shades in particular, I think that the conversation that we have often is there going to be automated shades or not? And then the first thing that usually comes up is, well, it's going to get VE'd. It's too expensive. And, in a restaurant, I am a member of the Chicago Yacht Club. And at the Chicago Yacht Club, they were talking about doing automated shades. And then some committee member said, no, we don't need them. I said, okay. So you're having your wedding and you're sitting near the glass because you like to sit near the glass to look out at the boats. And the shades were down because it was a sunny day. And now Oscar, he's actually one of the managers over there, has to come stand behind you and stand there pulling on a chain to raise the shade because the sun has set. And the fireworks are going to happen in a couple of hours. Do you want that to happen? No. Automated shades. What's the difference? $5,000. I think we can afford $5,000 over the life of our property, which is 100 years old, to have automated shades. And note that I just told a story, right? We didn't talk about the cost first. We talked about a use case and understanding why it would be so important to have that. So I think, so we start there, and then we have the conversation of like, what fabric and why are you picking the fabric and how the fabric be selected? And if it's automated, and then you pretty much know what fabric you want. In most cases, I think most interior designers instantly go to Mecco because they have the Mecco shade book. We then try and say that the shades need to be part of the lighting control spec. And so ultimately the shade spec would be referred to lighting controls. And then the shades come out of the lighting control. Now the challenge is like who installs it, who measures it. And that really all comes different, right? If it's Mecco versus Somfy versus Crestron versus Lutron. And that's just like those people all getting aligned with the way that the world actually works, which is like, it's a lighting control system and it's control of light. So it should live in this area. That's my opinion, and that's how we typically do it.
Sure. Well,
we do get some fight back, but
what kind of fight back do you get?
The fight back is but it's ours. Like, we want to pick the fabric. Okay, we'll pick the fabric, and then we'll refer to it. It's like a decorative light fixture, right? I mean, the decorative light fixture still needs a full specification associated with it. How does it hang? How heavy is it? What's the driver? And how's it controlled? I mean, back in the day, what lamp is it? And and then even to this day, how do you actually service it? That's not something that most interior designers or architects are looking at. So while the intricacies of the materiality, the shape and size of that decorative fixture may or may not come from Moralites. We actually, in our podcast, had somebody from Lighting Design Alliance talking about how they design a lot of the decorative fixtures for their Disney work that they do. So they would have the full detailed specification of those custom fixtures in their set. on some of the decorative projects that we've done, the interior designer has all those specifications, but our drawing needs to say, hey, it's a custom decorative fixture from Frank, and it needs this kind of wiring because it has a DALI driver in it. And so that gets connected, right? And so I think it's just about communicating back and forth. I'm going to switch subjects because I think this aligns a little bit more with where you guys are going with your podcast. But what about building automation connection? And how do you specify that? And that one, we're actually really looking for recommendations on the best paths, because in our experience, it's a conversation at schematic design. And then the lighting drawings say that there's all these connections to the building automation system.
Right.
That's about it.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't see our good friends in the engineering departments really taking the time to do a line by line BAS control points list. And so lighting ends up falling off of that list. And then we end up with change orders and we fight back because it's in the contract documents. It says it right there. But it wasn't in this page. And
that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. So this kind of circles back to exactly, I think, where Webster started with the whole drawings and specification thing. Is it's very easy in the written spec, and we all know the written spec is the Bible, and you're stuck to that, right? But there's always battles about what was in drawings, not in the drawings, based on section. Because you can, in your section, you can reference, electrical, reference this, reference that. But if those other sections don't also reference back, then that's when the case is had for change orders, because the EC can say, well, we didn't know about this shade integration. We didn't know about this BAS wiring because it wasn't shown on our drawings. It was on this. So how do you, fighting the spec is already a hard enough battle sometimes between disciplines, but then take it a step further. How do you also make sure that all of that information is on the drawings, that your drawings show that detail, the electrical drawings either refer to your drawings or show that detail, the engineers captured all of that, the shade, and just how do you make sure that all that happens if you're going to coordinate and capture all of this as part of your project and your scope?
Well, it doesn't happen. So let's just start there, right? Like it doesn't happen.
That's the problem. Yeah.
More Lights is in control of its drawings and its specification. And so I would say one of the things that we do, just another extension of something I truly believe strongly in, is that lighting designers should specify controls, and lighting designers should do drawings, and the drawing set should be part of the construction set. I know it's a challenge to get them part of the permit set because we don't stamp drawings. And quite honestly, our information really isn't for permit. It should be shown on electrical. Copy monitor is an amazing thing inside of Revit. If you don't know what it is, you can ask somebody in my office. I just know how to say it.
Well, I'll jump in and explain it a little bit, because basically with
the Autodesk
Revit
bill every month. That's about it.
Right. Yeah, with Revit, you have linked models, and it's not just like a background; it's a living entity, and so you can basically click on a shared linked model from another group and say, I'm going to copy monitor this, and if it gets moved or deleted, you get a notification saying, hey, by the way, this moved or got deleted, which is a great resource. I think that it's a fantastic way of coordinating your drawings, and I agree. I think a lot of lighting designers really could benefit from advancing their knowledge and capabilities in Revit.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing Revit. I think we started up charging for AutoCAD right around COVID, I think. And we only work, I'd say 98% we're in Revit. We're actually working on a residence right now that the entire team's in AutoCAD, but we're in Revit. We bring the AutoCAD in
Right.
and work in Revit because our tools, DALI tools, all of our scheduling, everything to our specification system is all linked in Revit.
And I think that's a great point, because a lot of people kind of push back on Revit, saying it's a 3D model. How do I do 2D stuff? And it's like, yeah, but you're neglecting all of these fantastic resources embedded in the software by saying, I'm not going to use Revit because we're working in AutoCAD everywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've just always kind of been on the cutting edge of technology. And so I've kind of pushed my team that way, and that's just what we've done. But
Sure.
to get back,
but back to our discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. So number one, I think you have to do your own drawings, and that drawing set should be construction documents. And I think that, what we do, and I think there's some people who would disagree with this, we actually tag emergency light fixtures based on what the electrical engineer tells us to do. And our drawing says specifically emergency lighting per electrical engineer, coordinate back with the electrical drawings. And then our notes page clearly states what specification sections are attached to these drawings. And here's a crazy thing we do. And there's been some conversation on our podcast a little bit about this. We don't put manufacturers' names or model numbers on our drawings anywhere. So, our other podcast friends would scream at me. Man, where am I going to find out? My job is to price this thing and turn this out and da da da. Yeah,
They sound like great guests.
You know what our specification says? 10% spare fixtures. How are you going to price a job and not lose your rear end if you didn't read that specification?
Yep.
And that's more of a light fixture podcast conversation than a controls conversation.
But I mean, it's a really good point, because, calling out a brand name on your sheets is almost kind of asking them to ignore the book specs in a way.
It is. And what about the alternates? And what about, back in the day, materiality of linear fixtures, right? Steel versus aluminum, right? You could do steel fixtures for cheaper than aluminum. Nowadays, we really don't. I don't know. Maybe there are some fixtures out of steel. Again, but the control narrative is in the spec. How is this room used? What are the presets labeled? The control manufacturers. Again, we have a pretty straightforward single line, and we feel very strongly about it. There is digital control from a manufacturer's specific control device to the light fixtures, which is a open protocol system, DALI or DMX. And then there is the manufacturer's proprietary system beyond that. Keypads, aux sensors, dimmer panels, whatever else.
Right.
That's our single line. It's on every single job. It's super simple. And any control manufacturer can bid that job. It is not a Lutron single line. It is not a Crestron single line. It's not a Dynalite single line. It's not an Enlight single line. It is
so the expectation
manufacturer
is that
agnostic.
When a submittal is put together to meet that single line, and there are additional devices required between your non-proprietary system and your proprietary system, that's the manufacturer's responsibility to include that.
And that's a contractor's responsibility to understand the system they're buying. Unfortunately, 99% of the time, they have no idea what they're buying until the foreman's in the field with all these parts asking, how does it all go together?
Yeah.
But, as lighting designers and as specifiers, we need to take advantage of that. I was just explaining to somebody the other day with, and I think the manufacturers would disagree with calling it tape light, but tape light. There's two ways to buy a tape light: pre-built, ready to go from the factory and install it.
Yep.
Or tape, extrusion, end caps, lenses.
Yep.
In a costing of a job at schematic design, design development, and the 7 other times we price a job before it goes out to bid, what's cheaper? Parts.
Yep.
Okay. So what is, and I welcome, we're putting out a lot of feelers in this podcast so far. So any electricians out there who want to argue with me, I would love it.
Well,
I
no,
don't
we
think there
definitely
are
take.
many.
If you don't mind, I'm just gonna say we absolutely love feedback. If people have strong feelings about this episode, please reach out. We want to hear your thoughts because we actually create our shorties sometimes to address things that people reach out to us regarding. So yeah there are some strong opinions that Avi is presenting here. Would love to hear other people's opinions in contrast or in affirmation of those.
So I don't think many electricians at bid time look deeply at the light fixture package. They get a price from
Yes.
our other
Well, they
podcast
usually have like 2
friends.
seconds to throw it together anyways, so.
Right, because all the reps know that the bid's due on this day. They're not going to
Right.
release their price the last minute.
Yep.
So if I'm a lighting designer, do I specify parts and pieces because I know that's going to be a cheaper fixture package? Or do I specify a luminaire that's pre-built?
See, that's
going
a
to
trick
cost
question.
the electrician a ton of time to put that thing together.
I think that depends on
But-
the designer, right? I mean, I think that truly depends on the designer.
Well, I think the other thing here is that it also depends on how designers approach details for tape light, because sometimes it's just a line on the drawing that says measure before you install, and then you have to basically buy the parts and field cut everything. Whereas from having a pre-built, you need to make sure that dimension is accurate before it's pre-built. And I think that also goes back to this conversation of coordination. If you're really in close with your interior designers and your architects to make sure that you have accurate dimensionality, great. But sometimes lighting designers don't get that information and they have to go schematic.
And you're not going to get millwork details from interior design before construction documents or even in construction documents, right? The millworker is going to modify the design, and the millwork details are done a month before the project's done because it's the last thing that's going to get installed. But all the roughing was done almost a year ago into the slab, right? So, but to bring it back to lighting controls, right? Like understanding, Lutron versus Crestron versus Dynalite versus Fifth Light versus N-Light versus. And I apologize to any manufacturer that I didn't speak of.
We're not endorsing any of these brands, by the way. We're just naming them.
It's just they're all a little bit different. And we use our spec to say we think that manufacturer blah, 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 or blah would be appropriate for this job. And if you are, so back in the day, we used to allow Lutron ecosystem, but in our control spec, it laid out very clearly that the rep agency and Lutron were fully liable and responsible for coordinating every fixture type with the appropriate drivers and pricing for the owner at no additional cost because we specified DALI. But if Lutron wanted to bid the job back in the day when they only did ecosystem, we said, sure. But it was in the control spec that was labeled because that's the appropriate place for it.
Yeah.
It wasn't on a drawing. It wasn't anywhere else. Our drawings don't say manufacturer, blah, 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 right? You need to go to the spec. And just one other piece to this. I can't tell you how many times we get phone calls from distributors 2 or 3 days before bid time. Hey, can you send us a price for this fixture package? What? Huh? We're lighting designers. We don't sell product. Well, where are all the manufacturer's names and model numbers? Well, have you picked up 16500 or 580 or whatever section it happens to be on that job? No, what's that? And again, that spare parts part of our spec
Yep.
is a big expense. And we've spun lots of ways, back in the day, provide 10% spare reflectors and 10% spare lamps. There's no lamps anymore, right? And there's no
but I do enjoy when I see that on people's specs still.
I mean, there are for sure lamps, but they're not the same lamps that
it's not. So I got called recently to a project I designed 17 years ago, opened 15 years ago. As far as I know, and I'm sure somebody else would correct me, it's one of the first ecosystem graphic eye, compact fluorescent downlight hotel conference rooms that I'm aware of.
Wow.
And I got called because it's finally time to do something. And, I'm really excited about it because it's DALI, right? Like we can't get ecosystem anymore, which is fun. Yep. But we did this 15 years ago. Like this is cool. And going back into it, and what can we retrofit from below and change to LED, and instead of putting LED replacement lamps in a CFL socket. I mean, come on. Plus we have DALI back there, right? Like this should be pretty cool. And so we're playing with the numbers right now to see if we can make this work for the hotel. But like that's a thing. Looking at what it was, it's kind of fun. I'm just going back in time and 17 years ago. Holy cow! It's been kind of cool.
No, that is always fun when it's like, oh yeah, what did I choose for this? Like, was that the thing that we were using back then? So like, yeah, that's always a lot of fun to just kind of go back into those dusty old projects that have been sitting on this shelf for years. In your case, over a decade. So,
but it's a DALI job. Like, that's the cool thing. We did 12 years ago. We redid the U.S. Post Office, the Central Post Office in Chicago. So it's a Mies van der Rohe building, part of Federal Plaza. It was part of ARA, Obama era project energy efficiency. So we went from metal halide to compact fluorescent. Yeah. And, it's Mies van der Rohe fixtures perfectly squared out. There's fixtures over walls. And we did 2 lamp fixtures over the walls, 3 lamp fixtures in the other spaces because it's a post office, right? You need a ridiculous amount of light. LED just wasn't there yet. Yeah. Now they're having, what's the problem nowadays? Can't get ballasts, can't get lamps. Yep. So we got brought in to help them go to the next level and change it to LED. And when it bid, I got calls from every agency in town. Hey, can we put the control system in on this? Can we put the control system in on this? Said, did you read the spec? The spec called for a new processor and readdressing. That's it. So if you can price a whole new manufacturer's C system for the price of manufacturer's A processor and reprogramming, sure. But, we're not changing aux we're not changing daylight sensors. We're not rewiring anything. We are literally, and Mies is amazing. The detail is a quarter turned and the fixture drops out of the ceiling. And we're able to then take off the custom trim ring that was made, take off the CFL fixture, put on the LED fixture, push it back in, rotate, obviously you have to terminate the 4 wires, hot, neutral,
Yep.
DALI plus,
Sure.
DALI minus, and readdress. It's pretty cool.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, and
I
I
mean,
think that's a great
that's the
argument
beauty
for
of DALI.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to bring this up as well. I was at the DALI Summit earlier this year, and you had a really excellent case study that you had done on the cost of DALI, which is pretty much the predominant argument that still continues to churn around in North America, which is 0 to 10 is less expensive than DALI. And so from this case study that you had done, do you mind just kind of hitting the bullet points of what that case study was and the results you found?
Absolutely. So I always like to start again and reemphasize what you just said. You are spending your customer or client's money unnecessarily if you are doing any type of control other than DALI. And I also, one other thing to kind of cover a DALI Alliance thing. In the United States, we just care about cost. There's a lot of amazing things you can do with DALI. All we care about in the United States, I don't, but my customers care about
the
cost.
majority argument is cost.
Cost. Yeah.
So this case study, and we should talk a little bit more about DALI too, but this case study is great. And we've done 2 different analyses, but the best is the case study. So this is a residential high rise here in Chicago that we designed, and happy to send around the presentation from the DALI Alliance, or we also gave the presentation at the IES in New York. And don't quote me on it. You have to look at the presentation, but approximately 140 zones of control over 3 floors of common space, right? Lobby, your amenity spaces and such. During the initial bidding process, the electrical contractor came and said, 0 to 10 will be cheaper, but none of the rep agencies will price it, so we can't give you an option. Because we have a rule in Chicago. You price what we specify until we say something else. Period. We are the lighting designer. Unless you want to become the lighting designer. But I don't think you want to be in competition with me on one of my projects as a rep agency, right? So, okay. Well, that's so the case study, basically the long and short of it is, once we went through the process, the electrical contractor priced, and we released a spec for everything in 0 to 10 and everything in DALI. So nobody was guesstimating anything. This was 0 to 10 versus DALI. Excuse me. Part numbers. And I'm going to take a drink.
That's okay.
We told the contractor that we wanted a Excel spreadsheet back, 0 to 10 versus DALI. And we also told the electrical contractor that all the rep agencies were going to send us distributor net pricing back as well. So we'd be able to understand markups and everything. So their initial return sent us that DALI was $1,000 more than 0 to 10 with all the conduit, wiring, everything else. Upon further evaluation, they marked up the DALI fixtures 25%. They marked up the 0 to 10 volt fixtures an average of 15%. Every rep agency had actually a different markup on it. From the distributor or contractor, I don't know. I got my spreadsheet from the electrical contractor. So when we discovered that they were willing to only mark up light fixtures 15% and rectified for this, the light fixture cost 0 to 10 versus DALI, 0 to 10 volt fixtures were $100 more. Cost of fixture. So anybody who's saying that DALI fixtures are more expensive than 0 to 10, you got nothing to stand on. One big caveat. We are talking about appropriate, professional 0 to 10 volt dimming. Okay. This is not Frank's drivers from China. And we also aren't having a conversation about 1% or 0.1%. These were all 1% dimming drivers. So, you got to clarify for those things.
Yeah.
So I hope anybody listening who's questioning.
No, I think that's really great and thorough. And I mean, there's always going to be those minor arguments that push back on it. But I think from just a brute force argument standpoint of DALI's more expensive than 0 to 10, I would say that you have evidence that it's actually the other way around.
Right. So 4 lines that we have to deal with in any project, right? Cost of fixtures, cost of controls, things that we all can understand, cost of wire, cost of labor. So I'm going to do controls last because that one's the most fun.
Sure.
The cost of wire was a increase from 0 to 10 to DALI because of the quantity of zones, right?
Yep.
And again, for argument's sake, this is the 0 to 10 volt standard that requires the relay to turn the power on and off. So that's a lot of extra wiring, but that's what we're required to use in the city of Chicago. And then the last thing is labor. It's a lot of extra labor to 0 to 10 versus DALI, and the contractor provided that proof of case. The last piece is the control system. We priced 3 different control system manufacturers. The 0 to 10 volt system was a significant increase to cost versus DALI.
Right.
So in the end, this project in the city of Chicago, where everything is in conduit, so you couldn't get more expensive. This is a union job. It was if you remember specifically, approximately 20% increase in cost to go to 0 to 10. So remember, I started this conversation by saying you are spending your customers' money irresponsibly if you're using anything but DALI. And that's a case in point. Audience listening, that's a resi apartment high rise. Come on. There is no project that wants to spend less money on lighting controls than a project like that.
Right.
Okay. And
we're almost out of time here, so I just want to package this up. No. I mean, this is all great. I like, this is really important information for our listeners, because this conversation of DALI just keeps coming up in our episodes more and more frequently.
Yes, it does.
And it's really important to have this kind of information about where these arguments are in reality, and what you can do to push back. I think the work you did for this case study was an extra lift, but you now have a case study that you can then show to other clients and say, hey, we've done this before. We know what we're doing. So I think, the argument will eventually start deteriorating if there's pushback. And so we really do need to give people the ability and the tools to make those arguments. So
and I say to everybody, and I said it at the IALD conference, IES conference, DALI Alliance, feel free to email me. I am happy to send you this information. I am happy to educate on this. I think the manufacturers, the reps, the specifiers, the distributors, there is money for all of us to be made by using this technology. And again, DALI can do amazing things. There's so much to the protocol, and the DALI Alliance will tell you amazing things that it can do.
Yep.
Great. But here's the thing. It's cheaper, and we're all using LEDs, which are digital. It dims them perfectly. Everything else you get for free. And you know what? It's cheaper. So it's not like, oh, buy one, get one free. No, it's just there and it's free. Like, why would you not? I just, so it's one of the things I really want to give back to the industry. And this is a way. The project I was just talking about 15 years ago, DALI. We've been
Yeah.
doing DALI in North America as more lights for 15 plus years. And
Yep.
any of you out there who specified ecosystem have been doing DALI.
Well, sure, it's just
So-
a proprietary version of DALI, but yeah, it's
Yes.
DALI.
So it's not scary, everybody. It's not expensive. It'll take care. It's like the kitty cat. It'll be fine. You'll be fine.
All right,
It's
so
okay.
gonna wrap this up because we also talked about a lot of other things too, and so I mean, really from your perspective, anyways, the person doing the lighting controls design should be the lighting designer, which is one of the questions that Ron and I usually ask our guests, and because ultimately it's the lighting designer making the decision about the lighting fixtures, they should then also be designing the system. It doesn't need to be the world's most intricate one-line diagram, according to what you guys are doing. You're designing the open end of the system, the non-proprietary part, and then saying, okay, whichever manufacturer gets this, you know what we have in our control intent narrative and our sequence of operations. So just make sure you meet that. We're good. And so that does kind of relieve some of the pressure on the lighting controls designers, in case lighting designers, if you're going to be doing that kind of work. And that way,
and I would modify the language one bit.
please.
It should be a certified lighting designer or a professional member of the IALD. And that's how you know if it is a independent lighting designer. I think that's really important. We're not using our trade associations and our certifications as well as we should be. You were talking about the new certification coming. Casey in my office is a certified lighting practitioner, CLCP.
Yeah.
There are things that exist out there and they should be used and discussed.
100%.
A lighting designer's an IALD member. There's no other trade organization for lighting designers, architectural lighting designers, than IALD, right?
Sure.
There's no certified lighting designer or certified lighting designers,
well,
right? And
yeah, I mean, there are going to be arguments against that, but let's agree for the sake of this argument here. But yeah, I mean, as far as things go, yes, make sure that you have a vetting process. Make sure that you can identify a professional lighting, not like professional stamping professional, but a professional lighting designer who knows what they're doing with lighting and can provide you a system, a lighting control system that is able to control those fixtures per the design.
Absolutely.
And one of the reasons why is because of the coordination required. You know, a lot of lighting designers that don't do lighting controls design don't do that coordination that you were talking about early on with the book specs and talking to people and telling that story. You know, we have so many people on this show who tell us about these conversations they've had with clients where they tell a story and walk them through the process of what to expect from their system. And that usually evolves into the specification either being protected or the reason they were presenting that argument being validated. So I think having those conversations is really critical. Now, a lot of designers do push back also saying, I don't get access to the owner, I can't talk to these people. And I think that that's a conversation worth having with your clients then, saying, I need to stand in front of these people.
It is a contract item for more lights, access to ownership.
Yep.
We can't do our job
Smart.
without access to ownership.
Sure. Well, yeah, and so I mean, all of that does kind of come together in this argument of DALI, because if you're using a DALI backend, which is the dimming control protocol to the fixture, you don't need to worry as much as you do with 0 to 10 volt, because with 0 to 10 volt, you're managing a lot of different components that then lean into a proprietary system.
That may or may not work. And I know we're running out of time, but this is so important because this is at the DALI Alliance event. We asked, I'm going to use manufacturer names, USAI and LSI, to send us 2 fixtures that were white tuning and DALI. That's all we said. We did not give part numbers. We did not provide anything else other than, I need this in a week. Bring 2 fixtures to New York. We got those 4 fixtures, 2 from USAI, 2 from LSI, wired them up to a controller. They worked. I welcome anybody to try and do that with a bunch of 0 to 10 volt stuff or a bunch of line voltage dimming LED stuff and just make it work. Don't tell somebody what dimmer you're going to use. Don't talk about, sync source, blah, whatever. It just worked. I mean, that's the power, guys. I mean, and that's huge.
Yeah,
it's
100%.
True. Yeah. No, Avi, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. And it's funny that we're still having this conversation with so many people between digital and analog. It seems so silly in this day and age to be using analog to start digital, to go analog back to a digital fixture. It blows my mind that we're doing that. We're not allowed. It's not easy to then make changes for the owner when they go, hey, this fixture, can we dim that? Can we change this zoning? Can we do this? And you can't do any of that when you're analog.
Wait, but you just made it more complicated. The changing thing, that's a change order. Don't get rid of my change orders. don't go there with DALI. Like, again, I think there's a major marketing problem with DALI. Don't take it beyond the very simple. It dims perfectly. It costs less. Just have that conversation. I want to change the zoning. I want to change all those things. Don't go there. Now you're making something feel like it's more expensive, and I'm not going to make any changes. I don't need that. Again, this industry, cheaper, and it's going to work today. Great.
Yep.
Done. Oh, now you want to make changes. You want to do all these other things. Cool. You already bought the other thing. We already priced that. All right. It's already done. We've already had a conversation, right? Like, again, sorry. It's so important. I think we just keep going to all these other things. Don't go there. It's base level. It works. It dims perfectly, and it's cheaper. Don't sell anything else about it.
But it's more fun to sell all the good stuff.
But they're not buying it. 15 years, guys.
No,
I know.
North
American DALI event was 15 years after Morelights designed and opened its first DALI project.
Yep. Well, I think DALI is starting to really make some moves here in North America, and we're starting to see some changes, and obviously it keeps coming up on the show. We're having these conversations over and over and over again. And I think just as time goes on, people will start to get their heads out of the sand a little bit, and we will start to move into this fully digital world that we are all already in. So we just have to continue to make that push. So yeah, Avi, thanks so much. We obviously have a much bigger issue that we need to continue to work on with drawings and specifications and communication between disciplines, but we'll save that for another podcast and we'll dive back into that again. So Avi, thank you so much for coming on today, man. Really appreciate it. I will close us out and just remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And also Light Fair. Hopefully we'll get to see you guys there in 2025. Additionally, it is financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com, where we have a lot of good stuff, but also information about the lighting specialist in controls certification through NAILD. Check it out. It hopefully is going to be a really great support to these initiatives like what DALI is trying to do in North America. We really want to help and provide a resource for the industry. So check it out, pre-register now. But otherwise, thanks for joining us. And Avi, really thank you so much. This was a great conversation.